At 5:30 a.m., a teenage girl walks barefoot into the freezing Nevada darkness. No phone, no jacket, no goodbye. And from that moment on, nothing in this case would ever make sense. Karlie Gusé was 16 years old, intelligent, loved, and days away from returning to normal life. But that morning would swallow her whole. Within hours, panic spread through her family. Police were called. Search teams were deployed. But what they didn't know was that this was not just a missing person case. This was the beginning of one of the most disturbing cold cases in modern Nevada history. Karlie had been visiting her stepmother and father in Chalfont Valley. The night before, she complained of feeling strange, anxious, paranoid. She told them she might have been drugged at a party days earlier. She barely slept. Her behavior frightened the adults around her. And then, before sunrise, she ran, barefoot, into rugged desert terrain that could kill an experienced hiker in hours. And that's where things got darker. Search dogs traced her scent down the road. Then suddenly, it vanished, as if she stepped into thin air. Helicopters scoured the land. Volunteers walked mile after mile. But there was no sign of struggle. No body, no blood, no evidence she ever left that road alive. What happened next changed everything. As days turned into weeks, theories exploded. Did she hallucinate and succumb to the elements? Did someone pick her up? Or did something far more disturbing happen in those final unseen moments? Every answer created more questions. Every lead collapsed into nothing. And the silence around Karlie's fate became unbearable. Because when a young girl runs into the dark and never returns, the real terror isn't what you know. It's what you don't. And this case was only just beginning. Investigators focused on the last 12 hours of Karlie's life. Every second mattered. Every word spoken that night would later be dissected for hidden meaning. Karlie had attended a party days earlier. She believed someone may have drugged her. Toxicology tests were never performed because she was still alive then. And that oversight would haunt this case forever. But the truth was far more disturbing. Her stepmother reported Karlie pacing, crying, terrified. She begged to sleep in the same bed, something she hadn't done in years. She said people were after her. She said something bad was coming. Was it paranoia, a mental health crisis, or a reaction to a substance that never left her system? And this is where the case took a turn. At dawn, Karlie bolted from the house. No shoes, no survival gear. Temperatures were near freezing. The desert terrain was brutal. Search teams believed no teenager could survive long in those conditions. Yet no body was found. Not for days. Not for months. Not for years. And that's where things got darker. Cell phone records showed no outgoing calls. No texts. No location pings. Surveillance cameras captured nothing. It was as if Karlie had been erased. Police insisted there was no evidence of foul play. But her family disagreed. They believed someone knew more. Someone wasn't talking. And what happened next changed everything. Online attention exploded. Months passed. Then a year. Then two. And Karlie Gusé was still not found. Posters faded. Search volunteers dwindled. But her mother never stopped. She pressed law enforcement relentlessly. She questioned timelines. She challenged official conclusions. And this is where the case took a turn. Investigators maintained their theory. Karlie suffered a mental health episode and died from exposure. But there was a problem. No remains. No clothing. No evidence. In terrain repeatedly searched by professionals. But the truth was far more disturbing. The area where Karlie vanished wasn't endless wilderness. It was rugged, yes, but finite. Search dogs had lost her scent abruptly. Experts admitted that scent rarely disappears without reason. Did she get into a vehicle? Was she carried? Or was something intentionally missed? What happened next changed everything. The family hired private investigators. New searches were conducted. New dogs were brought in. Once again, nothing. No bones. No fabric. But instead of answers, her discovery opened a new chapter of horror. Because death was confirmed. But the truth was still missing. When Karlie's remains were identified, shock rippled through everyone who followed the case. After more than 2 years, she was finally found. But instead of closure, investigators delivered something far worse. Uncertainty. Karlie Gusé was found dead in rugged terrain miles from where she was last seen. And that's where things got darker. Her remains were scattered. Exposure had erased critical forensic evidence. No clear cause of death could be determined. No injuries conclusively pointed to murder. No proof ruled it out either. The case sat in a horrifying gray zone. But what they didn't know was how damaging that ambiguity would be. Officials stated they believed she died from environmental exposure, but the family pushed back immediately. How did she survive so long? Why were no belongings found? Why did search teams miss her remains for years? What happened next changed everything. The autopsy offered no peace, no timeline, no definitive explanation. Toxicology was impossible. DNA told no story. Karlie was confirmed dead, but the circumstances remained a mystery. And this is where the case took a turn. Her mother publicly accused law enforcement of failures, missed areas, rushed conclusions. She argued that labeling the case as exposure was convenient. It closed files. It ended questions. But it didn't explain reality. Online investigators reignited theories. Was she picked up and later abandoned? Did someone exploit her vulnerable state? And in Karlie's case, death did not bring answers. It buried them. With no charges filed and no suspect named, Karlie's case slipped into cold case status. But cold doesn't mean forgotten. It means unresolved. And unresolved cases rot beneath the surface. But the truth was far more disturbing. Investigators stood by their conclusion. No evidence of foul play. No homicide. Just a tragic sequence of events. But Karlie's family refused to accept it. They demanded transparency. They demanded explanations. And this is where the case took a turn. Independent experts reviewed the search patterns. Some questioned how remains could go undiscovered in previously searched zones. Others pointed out inconsistencies in timelines. But without physical evidence, every argument collapsed into opinion. And that's where things got darker. Social media became both a weapon and a curse. And without accountability, the case remained frozen in time. Not solved, not explained, just quietly buried. And sometimes, that's the most unsettling ending of all. Every cold case has a moment where it either resurfaces or disappears forever. For Karlie's family, that moment never came. And that absence became its own answer. But the truth was far more disturbing. Despite public pressure, no grand jury was convened. No independent review was launched. Officials repeated the same conclusion. Exposure. Tragic. Unavoidable. Case closed. But families don't live in conclusions. They live in questions. Unfinished stories haunt the people left behind. For Karlie's family, time became an enemy. Each passing year made justice feel more distant. But the truth was far more disturbing. Cold cases rarely end with dramatic breakthroughs. Most end with paperwork, with quiet files, with families forced to accept uncertainty as fate. And that's where things got darker. Karlie's death never reached a courtroom. No evidence was tested under cross-examination. No narrative was challenged. The official version stood unopposed. And when no one argues the truth, it hardens into permanence. What happened next changed everything emotionally, even if not legally. Karlie's mother shifted from seeking answers to preserving memory. She spoke publicly. She refused to let her daughter's name fade. Because remembrance is resistance. Each interview reopened wounds. Each anniversary reinforced the loss. Cold cases live in the margins of the justice system. They exist without resolution, without endings. Karlie's case sits firmly there. And that's where things got darker. There was no villain to condemn. No verdict to deliver. Just a young life cut short and a system unable to explain why. But what they didn't know was how deeply that ambiguity would echo. Every unanswered case sends a message that some lives end without explanation. That certainty is optional. And for families, that message is unbearable. Karlie's final hours remain fragmented. Fear, confusion, flight, death. But the middle is missing. And that missing piece is everything. What happened next changed everything emotionally. Acceptance replaced hope. Not because answers were found, but because exhaustion set in. Fighting a closed system takes a toll. But acceptance does not mean belief. It means survival. As years pass, cases like Karlie's fade into statistics. One more unsolved death. One more file on a shelf. But behind every file is a family that never stops asking why. And that's where things got darker. The justice system measures success in convictions. But families measure it in understanding. And Karlie's family never received that. What happened next changed everything internally. The search for answers transformed into a mission to prevent erasure. To ensure her name still mattered. Karlie Gusé was found dead. But her death did not bring clarity. It brought silence. And silence can be more violent than answers. Because silence implies acceptance. And acceptance implies closure. But there was none. Her story remains unfinished. Her case unresolved. And her final moments unknown. This is where Karlie's story leaves us. Not with a verdict. Not with a confession. But with a void. A teenage girl walked into the darkness and never came back the same way. She was later found dead. And no one can explain how or why. What they didn't know that morning was that her disappearance would become a permanent question mark. One that time could not erase. Karlie's case forces an uncomfortable reality. That systems fail. That answers aren't guaranteed. That truth can vanish without a trace. And that's where the real horror lies. Because somewhere between fear and silence, a young life was lost. And until the unanswered questions are confronted, Karlie Gusé's story remains open, unfinished, and haunting.